I never thought a quiet Saturday morning would spiral into something that involved both the HOA and the local police department. But here we are. It started like any other day. I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the rare moment of peace, when I heard the unmistakable sound of metal being ripped from my roof. At first, I thought it was just some maintenance work nearby. But when I stepped outside, I couldn't believe what I saw. Corinne from the HOA standing in my yard, dragging my satellite dish down the side of my house like it was some kind of trash. She looked right at me, proud of what she'd done. "This is an eyesore," she snapped. "It violates neighborhood appearance guidelines." I tried to explain that the dish wasn't for TV or personal use. It was part of a community project. What she didn't realize, and what I didn't get the chance to explain before she marched off, was that this specific satellite dish was the main uplink for a private security network, a network the local police department relied on for real-time access to neighborhood security cameras. Yes, cameras that help track crime, assist with emergency calls, and monitor suspicious activity. Karen had no idea. She'd just cut off the signal feed for the entire block's surveillance system. At that moment, I had to decide: rush to explain everything and maybe stop a disaster, or let the situation unfold and show the HOA just how serious this mistake really was. Tension was thick, and I could already hear the police scanner chirping with confusion over a lost signal. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, an officer pulled up to my driveway, looking more confused than concerned. What happened next? You're not going to believe it. The officer stepped out of the car slowly, glancing up at where the satellite dish used to be, then back at me. He looked young, maybe fresh out of the academy, but his tone was sharp. "We've got a major outage," he said. "All feeds from this area just went dark 10 minutes ago. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Before I could answer, Karen reappeared, arms crossed and looking very pleased with herself, like she had just saved the neighborhood from some terrible architectural crime. "She pulled it down," I said, pointing right at her. "That dish was part of the signal system the police use for surveillance. You just took out live camera access for 5 blocks. Karen's smug look faded for just a second before she scoffed. "That's ridiculous. It was just some ugly dish. You're not fooling anyone with that story." Her voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and soon a couple of them started coming out onto their porches, curious about the commotion. What Karen didn't know, what most people didn't, is that I'm part of the neighborhood tech volunteer group that partnered with the city to keep these cameras running. We installed a backup satellite uplink at my house because this area is notorious for dropped connections and power issues. It wasn't just decoration. It was a vital piece of hardware that took weeks to get approved through city permits. Karen, of course, never bothered to attend those community meetings. She only cared about her version of neighborhood charm. The officer raised an eyebrow and stepped closer to inspect the mangled dish on the ground. Then his radio crackled again. Dispatch was asking for a status update, and not just on the feed outage. There had been a break-in across town, and they needed footage from our area's cameras right away. That's when everything started to spiral. The officer knelt down, running his fingers along the bent satellite arm, shaking his head slightly. "This thing looks like it was yanked clean off," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Karen tried to brush it off, saying something about how HOA rules were above random tech clutter. But her confidence was clearly starting to crack. A few more neighbors had gathered now, whispering among themselves. Some of them recognized the dish and remembered the community meeting where we explained its purpose. But Karen had always skipped those, claiming she had more important things to do. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up. The city tech coordinator was calling. Messages from the police department were coming in rapid fire, asking why the feed was down, if we had a backup, how long until it could be restored. I didn't have answers yet, And the worst part was, I knew the process to reinstall the signal wasn't going to be simple. The hardware needed calibration. It wasn't just plugged-on play, and definitely not something you could fix on the spot. But the real tension was just beginning to show. The officer, now realizing the seriousness, radioed in that the uplink was down due to civilian interference. He glanced at Karen. "We're going to need to document who tampered with the equipment," he said. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked unsure. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "No one told me." That's when another voice chimed in, Mrs. Ellis, an older neighbor who lived 2 doors down. "You were told. Karen, you were in the email thread. You just ignored it like always." Karen's face flushed, but before she could respond, the officer's radio buzzed again. This time, the tone was more urgent. There had been movement near the property line. Of a home 3 streets over movement the now missing camera feed would have caught. I could feel my stomach drop, and that's when we heard the sound of sirens getting closer. The sirens grew louder, echoing down the quiet street like a warning bell. Everyone turned toward the sound, the officer instinctively placing a hand on his belt as he scanned the area. Karen, now visibly shaken, stepped back and muttered, "This has gone too far." But no one was really listening to her anymore. The focus had shifted to the escalating situation just blocks away, one we were supposed to have eyes on. One we no longer could. A second squad car pulled in fast and parked at the curb. Another officer jumped out, this one older, more seasoned, and clearly aware of what was unfolding. He walked straight over to us. No small talk, just facts. "There's been a suspected burglary. The suspect was last seen heading toward the woods behind this neighborhood. We had him on the street cameras until this entire zone went dark." His eyes landed on the mangled dish. "That blackout cost us visual." I explained again what had happened, how the dish was vital, how it wasn't just some random object stuck on my roof. He nodded, but the tension in his jaw didn't ease. "We need that feed back up now," he said. "We've got a K9 unit sweeping, but without that signal, we're blind on the west side." As I tried to access the backup system from my laptop, my stomach sank. Without the satellite uplink, the cameras wouldn't connect. They were designed for private, secure transmission. No internet backups, no cloud redundancy. Just fast, direct feed. And it was all offline because someone didn't like how it looked. Karen tried again to defend herself, but this time, even the HOA board president who had just arrived gave her a cold stare. "You took it down without authorization. There were procedures," he said sternly. The sound of barking in the distance cut through the air, sharp and alert. Flashlights danced through the tree line behind the houses. Every second counted now. And that's when the K9 handler shouted something none of us were ready for. The K9 handler's voice rang out across the neighborhood, sharp and urgent. "We found something bag-tossed near the creek." Officers rushed toward the sound, cutting through backyards as residents stood frozen on their porches. The barking intensified, echoing through the trees like a warning, but also like confirmation. Everyone knew something serious was happening, but no one, not even the officers, was ready for what they were about to uncover. I stayed near the driveway, watching as police lights flickered through the trees. Karen stood just a few feet away from me now, silent, her arms folded tight like she was trying to hold herself together. Her confident mask was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. She leaned toward me, voice low. "I didn't know it was for the police. I just thought it was some weird hobby of yours. I didn't mean for this." But her words didn't matter anymore. Damage had already been done. Minutes later, an officer emerged from the woods, holding a black duffel bag in one hand and speaking into his radio with the other. The senior cop stepped in to take a closer look. That's when the second twist Hit us like a punch. What was inside the bag wasn't just tools or stolen items. It was surveillance equipment, infrared scopes, a jamming device, even a police-style scanner. The kind of gear someone would use if they wanted to move through a neighborhood unseen. And undetected, a chilling silence fell over the group as the officer looked up at me. Someone knew exactly where the weak spots were. They waited for the cameras to drop. The realization sunk in fast. This wasn't random. The blackout caused by Karen's interference might not have just been bad timing. It could have been exactly what the suspect was counting on. The whole street felt like it was holding its breath. The officer holding the bag gave a signal, and within seconds, more units began combing the wooded area. A helicopter hovered overhead now, its spotlight sweeping through the trees. The neighborhood, normally so quiet you could hear lawn sprinklers, at night had turned into a full-scale police operation. The tension was thick, and even Karen stood completely still, her earlier defiance gone. She knew, like the rest of us, that this was no ordinary break-in. Someone had studied the area, waited for the cameras to go dark and used that window to move in. Then came the call from one of the officers near the creek. Suspect detained. We've got him. A flurry of movement followed as police emerged, dragging a man in tactical gear through the brush. His face was covered in dirt, but his eyes were sharp-focused. Too calm for someone just caught. As they searched him, they found something else. A printed satellite map of our neighborhood, marked with signal points, camera locations, and my address circled in red. That was the moment it hit everyone. This wasn't just a thief hoping to dodge cameras. This was someone who had been targeting the neighborhood for weeks, maybe longer. And somehow, they had known exactly which equipment kept the camera system alive. The dish wasn't just a lucky guess. It was a planned hit. Back at the street, Karen was speechless. Even the HOA board looked stunned. No one had ever imagined her ripping down that satellite would expose the entire block. The officer glanced over at her. "You might have helped him more than you think," he said. But just as things seemed to settle, just when we thought it was over, my phone buzzed. An alert from the backup system. Someone had just tried to log in remotely. From outside the country, the suspect we caught might not have been working alone. The alert on my phone changed everything again. I showed it to the officer, and within minutes, the city's cybercrime unit was brought in to trace the remote login. It turned out the man they arrested had ties to a larger ring involved in identity theft and digital surveillance crimes. Our quiet neighborhood was just one of several they'd been monitoring. The plan had been to knock out the satellite feeds, slip through blind spots, and collect sensitive data from smart homes while residents slept. The uplink Karen had torn down was the last active feed left in this part of the city. The police were able to track the overseas attempt back to a flagged network known for hacking incidents. That one tip helped connect the dots across several unsolved cases in nearby towns. As for Karen, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. She was removed from her position immediately for acting without approval and for damaging city equipment. Though she tried to apologize, the damage was already done. Trust isn't easy to rebuild, especially when safety was put at risk. The officers helped reinstall a new, more secure uplink. This time, the city offered to fund and protect it directly. My neighbors, once passive about tech, now showed real interest in how the system worked and how they could support it. The situation reminded all of us how quickly things can unravel when people ignore communication and act on assumptions. Looking back, it was more than just a broken satellite dish. It was a chain reaction started by one careless decision. But it also exposed something far worse and gave the community a chance to step up, stay alert, and work together. Because in the end, neighborhood security isn't just about cameras, it's about people paying attention.